What's up everyone, this is Pooka and I'm bringing you the top 20 cards of the 2011-2012 season for the Pokemon TCG. Now the only criteria really for making this list is the card has to impact the way the game was played. It has to alter the way decks were built, and it just kind of creates new strategies, and the card makes the list because you knew it was there and you knew you had to account for it, and it just changed the way everybody thought. So even though cards like Pokemon Collector, Professor Juniper, Professor Oak's New Theory, stuff like that, they're all very, very good cards, and you would say, yeah, well obviously they're one of the top 20 cards of the format. They didn't really do anything to alter the way that we looked at the game. So let's take a look. We have a bunch of cards. They could range from being useful at the beginning of the season all the way to the end of the season because stuff changed as time went on. But let's jump right into it with number 20. Kicking off the list at number 20 is a card that's been around for ages, but it's still really good. And that card is Rare Candy. Now, without this card, Stage 2 Pokemon would not be playable at all. And that's why it makes the list. In a format that was dominated mostly by basic Pokemon, the only reason that the evolutions could really put up a fight was because of Rare Candy. It allows you to skip a stage, so you can go all the way from the basic up to Stage 2, you skip the Stage 1 step, and you can just kind of go from there. It's the only way you could be on even footing with these heavy-hitting, fast, basic Pokemon that we saw so many of throughout the season. Now, Rare Candy was used with all sorts of stuff throughout the season. The main ones were stuff like Magnezone Prime, Typhlosion Prime, even Emboar, and number one usage for Rare Candy was, of course, Vileplume. But overall, I mean, this is just a card that has been around since 2004, actually. And each year it gets used again and again and again, because I think the creators of the game realized if we don't have this Rare Candy card in our format, the Stage 2 Pokemon just don't really work. It takes too long to go to basic Stage 1, Stage 2, when all these basic Pokemon can just kind of knock them out before they set up. So Rare Candy's coming in at number 20. It's going to be around for a while. We've had it for a while, and I'm glad to still have it. Number 19, we have Max Potion. Initially, when this card was released, it actually wasn't played very often at all. People thought, why would I ever want to discard all my energy from my Pokemon? I mean, that makes no sense. Sure, I'll heal the damage, but then I can't even attack. The reality was, once the format progressed, there were a lot of Pokemon that would just dish out a bunch of damage, and they would have such high HP that they could take a hit back, and then you would just play Max Potion to heal off all the damage, and your opponent basically wasted a turn attacking you because, hey, you got to heal off all the damage. Now early on, it was played a little bit with cards like Yanmega Prime and Donphan Prime, cards that took 0 or 1 energy to even attack, because it made sense. You can heal off all your damage, just attach again, and attack, and act like nothing happened. But once Dark Explorers came out, that's when Max Potion really started to shine, and we saw a ton of it in the decks at US Nationals and Worlds. Now, the main concept for Max Potion was, of course, the Kling Klang deck that John Roberts II used to win US Nationals. Without Max Potion, this deck does not function at all. It revolves around moving energy around with Kling Klang. Then you actually don't have to discard your energy, and you can still heal all the damage. So you shift the energy off one guy, heal all the damage with Max Potion, shift the energy back to your guy, and you just keep attacking. So Max Potion really changed the way the game was played. Once you played against these Kling Klang decks, you realized, oh, I can't knock them out in 2 hits, so I have to switch my strategy, try to knock them out in 1 hit, or use a bunch of Pokemon catchers to knock out all the surrounding things, and then maybe I'll knock it out later. But Max Potion was a big deal. We saw it in pretty much every top deck near the end of the season, because it's very powerful. You can heal all the damage off your Pokemon, and when your Pokemon start getting up to 180 hit points, that becomes a ridiculous card. Coming in at number 18, we actually have a supporter card, and that is Twins. Now you might look at this and say, what could that possibly do? It's just 2 little girls. Heh, that can't do anything. Well, actually, Twins is one of the most complicated cards in the history of Pokemon. What would happen is, it only works when you're losing. So, the instant your opponent takes the first prize, you now have access to Twins, and you get to search for any 2 cards in your deck, and you can go ahead and just grab what you want. Now, this was especially powerful with Vileplume, because you could just search for your rare candy or Vileplume, and you're all set, you're good to go. The most difficult part about getting Stage 2s out is finding the rare candy, and that's where Twins would come in handy. So Twins, it actually made a lot of games very complicated, because it would turn into, well, I don't want to take a prize, because then my opponent gets to play the Twins. But if I don't take a prize, I need to win the game. So you would see some interesting strategies come about as the game progressed. Originally, you could see the obvious, well, I'm just not going to take a prize until I can disrupt my opponent's hand, and maybe he won't have a Twins. Earlier in the season, that was in the form of Judge, where you would judge, your opponent has to shuffle in and draw 4, and then you would take the first prize, and you would hope that they didn't have the Twins. That was a good way of dealing with it. Later on, it was stuff like, hey, I can use Typhlosion Prime's Afterburner to actually knock out my own Pokemon, so then I can take a prize, and we'll still be even on prizes, and he still won't be able to set up because he can't use his Twins yet. The decks that played Twins heavily relied on it. They would play 4 of them, so if they didn't ever have access to it, then they probably wouldn't set up. This is what made cards like Electrode Prime good as well. They would shut off Twins. Really, all of these strategies were just so good because of this supporter. If you could cut off access to their ability to use Twins, then they would just lose and fall apart. Now, as the season progressed later on, you would see clever plays with stuff like Darkrai EX's Night Spear, where you would purposely try not to take a knockout. You would try to find a Pokemon that had more than 90 hit points. So you could Night Spear, do 90 to their active, and then 30 to a benched Oddish. And then you would play a Pokemon catcher and knock out both Oddishes at the same time. Otherwise, if you just knocked out one Oddish, they would play a Twins, Rare Candy, Vileplume, and now you're trainer locked. Other stuff that would happen is what John Roberts II showed off in his Kling Klang deck. He would use Groudon EX's Tromp to spread damage to a bunch of Oddishes, or he would just wait until he got Kyogre EX and use Dual Splash and knock out 2 Oddishes at once. All of these strategies were just because Twins was too good. You couldn't let your opponent have it. It was like that for the whole season. There was a little lull where Twins wasn't played very often, but early on it was dominant, and then as the game went towards more EXs, it dropped out a little bit. People didn't think they could play Stage 2s anymore, and then it popped up back in Nationals and Worlds. So Twins, it was very good last format, very good this format as well. It's going to be gone now, so no more headaches, no more, can I take this prize? Number 17 is Lost Remover, a trainer card that really didn't see much play when it initially came out. Now, when it did come out, people kind of looked at it and said, oh, that's really good. That could be good someday. But what happened was, there wasn't much emphasis on special energy at the time, so there was really no reason to play it. To keep in mind, when this card came out, decks like Luxchomp and all those decks with SP, those were the trend at the time. And what was the point of playing Lost Remover when it was mostly basic energy? That trend continued into the next format, where it was Typhlosion Reshiram and Yanmega Magnezone. Why in the world would you play Lost Remover when there's no special energy in the format? But eventually, what happened was double colorless energy, and then prism energy, rainbow energy, special dark, special metal, rescue energy. All of these different energy types were very popular, and so people started saying, hey, these energy are always on the field. Why wouldn't I play Lost Remover? It basically just removes an energy from play. No, not basically, that's exactly what it does. And all you have to do is play 1 or 2 of these guys, and then you play 4 Junk Arms, and if you play a deck that really relies on special energy, you can just go ahead and Lost Remover, Junk Arm for Lost Remover, and you can really just win a game by removing energy off your opponent's field. So Lost Remover, it made decks sort of unplayable. The Kling Klang deck that did win US Nationals runs pretty much all special energy. John, he's a great player, but he's very fortunate that he didn't run into many decks with Lost Remover. However, what happened at the World Championships was pretty much everyone ran 2 Lost Removers in their deck because they thought, well, if I run these 2 cards, I pretty much beat that Kling Klang deck, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. And that's pretty much what happened. Everybody ran Lost Remover by the end of the format. It was good for getting rid of double colorless, getting rid of Prism Energy, Rainbow Energy, and all that stuff. And it really changed the way that the game was played. So Lost Remover sitting here at number 17. At 16 we have Chandelure. Now this guy came out during City Championships, and right away people realized, hey, this is kind of a cool card. I mean, just look at it. It has an ability that lets you put 3 damage counters anywhere on your opponent's field. How do we abuse that? And eventually people stumbled on to Chandelure with Dodrio, which gives your Pokemon 2 less retreat cost. So you get the Dodrio on your bench, Chandelure up active, you place 3 damage counters, you retreat to a new Chandelure, you place 3 more damage counters. And it was a pretty neat deck that just didn't need to attach energy, and it didn't actually attack. So what you would do is just keep using Cursed Shadow with Chandelure, play a Tropical Beach, and then every turn you would just keep going. You would Cursed Shadow over and over, retreat, switch between the Chandelures, and you didn't have to attack, so you would just fill your hand up to 7 cards at the end of your turn. Now this deck was played with Vileplume, which made it very deadly. Trainer cards were really the definition of this format. You know, there were so many things like Pokemon Catcher, Switch, Junk Arm, Plus Power, all this stuff. Vileplume shut off, so Chandelure worked really well with Vileplume and Dodrio. And it was one of the top decks at Cities, maybe the best deck during Cities. So Chandelure, it makes the list because it was something you knew you had to account for. And it's also just pretty cool that you don't have to even have energy on your Pokemon to do anything. You don't even actually have to attack, and you can win a game. You can win an entire game without actually attacking, and you'll take all 6 prizes. So that's pretty neat. We've never really seen that before in Pokemon. And, you know, during states and regionals, it kind of fell off because some strong cards came out. But then at the end of the format, once again, it came out in the Excelgor Chandelure deck, which allowed you to manipulate damage and lock your opponent down. So Chandelure was a great Pokemon for this format. I don't know how playable it'll be in the future, but it was a cool card while it lasted. We're getting in the zone for the next one. Magnezone, that is. During cities, regionals, battle roads, even up to states, Magnezone Prime was one of the most feared Pokemon in the entire game. All around, it's just an incredible card. It has 140 hit points, which is very, very good. It has one of the best powers we've ever seen with Magnetic Draw, where you just keep refilling your hand up to 6 cards. And then Lost Burn just happened to be an incredible attack as well. Magnezone, once you got it into play, you pretty much were all set for the rest of the game. You would keep just drawing cards every single turn. One Magnezone would lead to another, and then you would eventually just swarm them. The only problem was getting enough energy into play to go ahead and use Lost Burn. Because once you did, you could knock out pretty much anything. Well, really, you can knock out anything. There is no real damage ceiling for this card, because it does 50 for each energy put in the Lost Zone. Now the drawback was that you did have to put the energy in the Lost Zone. If you had to discard your energy, that would probably be way too good with cards like Typhlosion Prime and Electric and all that stuff. Originally it was used with Yanmega, because the theory is, hey, I attack with Yanmega, takes no energy. In the meantime, I can just attach energy to my Pokemon, and eventually I can Lost Burn for a bunch of damage. So Yanmega Magnezone was very big, up through regionals. Then during cities, Typhlosion Magnezone was a solid deck as well. And then throughout the rest of the season, people kept trying to use Magnezone. It never really had much success after City Championships, but it was still a feared deck. It was very good against the EX Pokemon, especially like Mewtwo, because it could just Lost Burn. It would only take 4 energy for you to take 2 prizes, so that's a very good trade-off. And eventually you would beat these EXs. Some big fighting Pokemon that came out really made it tough for Magnezone to shine for the rest of the season, but you can't deny that this was one of the best cards throughout the season. Number 14 is the only stadium card that will be making this list, and that is Skyarrow Bridge. Now you might kind of look at this funny, thinking a stadium card would be something that can really impact the game, but it did. Even though the effect seems pretty simple, all basic Pokemon in play get one less retreat cost, it opened up the doors for a lot of strategies. Even something as simple as, hey, I'm using an electric deck and I want to promote a Pokemon that has free retreat, so then I can just Dynamo it to the bench and power up a new Pokemon. Pretty good. Now all of your one retreat cost Pokemon now become free retreat. The main deck that came from this was of course the CMT deck, which used Celebi Prime. You would send up the Celebi, which normally had a 1 retreat cost. But then you would play the Skyarrow Bridge, you would give it free retreat, you would use the power Forest Breath, you would get to attach an extra energy for your turn, then you get to retreat him and attack with whoever you want. Skyarrow Bridge completely made that deck viable. And it was one of the top decks ever since Skyarrow Bridge came out. I mean, it was good at states, regionals, nationals, and worlds. CMT was there at all of them. And it was all because of Skyarrow Bridge. But the biggest thing that Skyarrow Bridge did was bring back good old Smeargle. Now, Smeargle turned into a staple in pretty much every deck just because of Skyarrow Bridge. Before, it wasn't playable at all, but now Skyarrow Bridge brought it back. We'll get more into Smeargle a little bit later. Sorry, spoiler alert. But Skyarrow Bridge, it opened up all these new options, and that's why it has to be on this list. Without it, decks would have been completely different, strategies would have changed altogether, and we would have been playing a completely different game without our good old Skyarrow Bridge. Speaking of Smeargle, here he is, here at number 13. Now, why is such an innocent-looking, colorless Pokemon so high up on this list? I mean, number 13, it's already outclassing things like Rare Candy and Magnezone. Well, that's because Portrait was the best power in the game once Skyarrow Bridge came out. Portrait, it allows you to look at your opponent's hand, and then if there's a supporter card there, you get to use it. Now, this not only helped you with consistency by giving you another opportunity to get a supporter and set up, but it also allowed for some ridiculous turns where you could use Portrait, you would copy something like a Professor Juniper, discard your hand, draw 7 cards, you could play a switch, go to a new Smeargle, Portrait again, get 7 new cards again, and you could pull off all sorts of shenanigans just because of this card. Now, this also led to much deeper strategy in games. What would happen is both players would have Smeargle usually, and you would have a supporter in your hand and you'd say, oh, I really don't want to keep this in my hand because then my opponent gets to use it. So what would happen is people would start to play cards like Junk Arm to discard their supporters so then their opponent couldn't copy theirs, and it became kind of a chess game where, hey, I need these supporters to set up, but I also need my opponent not to have them, because if he gets too many extra supporters with Portrait, I'm just going to end up losing because he has more stuff to work with. So Smeargle, it really changed the way that everybody played. It also changed the way decks were built quite a bit. People started adding more random receivers to their deck, which allowed them to not have more supporters in their hand, and you can also Junk Arm for the random receiver, you'd get it back, and then they wouldn't be able to Portrait your supporter. So all this just revolved around one little painting Pokemon who really painted the picture for the rest of the format. So Smeargle, he earns his spot here. Coming in at number 12 has to be the most hated Pokemon in the history of the Pokemon TCG. And that would be none other than Durant. Now I'll pause for a second while you boo and shout obscenities and throw things at the computer screen. But Durant, there's no questioning, it was one of the cards you had to look out for during the city championships, state championships, and regionals. Devour has to be one of the most annoying things in the game. For each Durant you have in play, it just discards the top card of your deck. So if you have 4 Durants out, 1 energy, discards the top 4 cards of your opponent's deck, and it wouldn't actually try to take prizes at all. It would just try to run you out of cards in your deck. It's the first time, really, a mill deck worked in the Pokemon TCG. We've had other stuff in the past, like Flygon Level X, that was a little successful, but this was the one mill deck that finally was legitimate. It would work a lot. And Durant, it won a lot of city championships, it won some state championships, and it was always a threat to win tournaments. You never knew what was going to get discarded off the top of your deck. All it took was a couple bad discards, and all of a sudden you were going to lose. So it really could beat any deck. Of course, this was popularized by two-time world champion Jason Kozinski, who was the biggest advocate for the deck, even though he told me that this was the worst deck he'd ever seen in his life. I showed up to a city championship, and he was playing it a couple weeks later. So, the reason Durant was any good at all was because of the supporting trainers. Stuff like Pokemon Catcher, Crushing Hammer, Lost Remover, Junk Arm, just that stuff, and Eviolite would all make Durant difficult to knock out. And all it would try to do is stall for time, try to remove your energy off your Pokemon, maybe Catcher out something with a big retreat cost, and then it would just devour your deck. And it really just had to buy time to devour over and over because, I mean, when you look at it, you have to devour a lot of cards to win a game. Just starting off, after you draw your opening 7, and then you put out your 6 prizes and you draw your first card, that's only 14 cards gone. So that means 46 cards you have to get through. Now, of course, your opponent will play stuff like Juniper, Oak's New Theory, and all sorts of stuff that'll draw through cards that'll help you out a little bit, but for the most part, you probably had to discard 20 to 30 cards every game in order to win the match. And in order to do that, you would need to buy some time, because if they take all 6 prizes before you deck them out, then you lose. But Durant, it did that a lot of the time. It was super annoying. It gave people a lot of headaches. I'm sure some people loved the deck, but more people definitely hated it than anything. So I'm just going to stop talking about it now, because I know people are probably getting angry. Durant is here. He isn't very good anymore, because Darkrai came out, kind of killed it, squashed the ant. So did Heatmore. But Durant, he had his reign of terror. That's why he's here. At number 11, we're actually going to have a trio of Pokemon, because they all pretty much are similar. And that will be Zekrom, Reshiram, and Kyurem. Now, they are the 3 legendary Pokemon from Black and White. They're a trio, so I figured I might as well put them together. Now, Zekrom, of course, was used in many, many decks, like Zekrom Electric. Anyone hear of that deck? It's pretty good. It also was used early on in the season with Pachirisu and Shaman, the highly feared ZPS deck that could actually do a Bolt Strike turn 1 and knock out your only basic Pokemon. That was a big problem for a while. So Zekrom, he was definitely one of the top Pokemon for a long time. It was always something you had to look out for. Especially when Eviolite came out, it made Bolt Strike that much more fearsome because it reduced the damage to itself and it just made it that much stronger. Reshiram, of course, was used with Typhlosion, also with Emboar a little bit, mainly Typhlosion though. Blue Flare was a great attack. You know, 120 damage was a lot when these cards first came out. It would knock out pretty much every Pokemon, and if it didn't, you'd have a couple plus powers to go ahead and do the extra damage for you. So Zekrom, Reshiram, obviously these are great cards. They did 120 damage for 3 energy. They both benefited from some of the best energy acceleration in the game, and that's why they were so popular. Now, Kyurem was kind of the forgotten one of the 3, but it did have a good run throughout cities. It was used with Electrode Prime because Glaciate is an incredible attack. It does 30 damage to every single one of your opponent's Pokemon. When it came out, it was very good against stuff like Electric because that only has 90 hit points. You just Glaciate 3 times and you would take a ton of prizes. This was a very, very good card when it came out. The only downside to it is that Eviolite was kind of the killer for it. Reduced damage by 20. When you're doing 10 a turn, it's not really that great, but Kyurem was still one of the best cards around, and it was very fearsome once it got going. Now, the one thing these guys all have in common, of course, is Outrage, which is a really, really good attack for 2 colorless energy. Does 20 plus 10 for each damage counter on them, and they have 130 hit points. So these cards were extremely good for a long time. Before the EXs came out, these Pokemon were the best. No question about it. They dominated the season all the way up to cities. Reshiram kind of fell off. Kyurem kind of fell off there. Zekrom, he kept being strong all the way throughout the format. but these guys definitely put a dent in the format at number 11, Zekrom, Reshiram, and Kyurem. Okay folks, that's going to wrap it up for part 1 of the top 20 cards from the 2011-2012 Pokemon TCG season. We did numbers 20 through 11 right here, and the next part will cover the elusive top 10. So which cards do you think are going to finish in the top 10? We'll see who ends up being number 1. See if you think any cards got snubbed. Find out in the next part of this video.